Hello and welcome back to Speed Demon Painting. Today we are doing the first video in a series called Getting Started with a certain faction, and today we are getting started with the Sultanate. Now, why am I making these videos? What is the intent of these videos? Well, it is a way to help new players get into the game. For instance, they fancy one faction, in this case the Sultanate, to help them a bit with what they can get, what will be a good starting off point. Or if you're an existing player and you want to start with a new faction, what are interesting builds that you can do with them? You have to remember, when Warcradle Studios releases plastic sets, there is an incentive to buy the same set multiple times, because you can make multiple types of ships with each different plastic sprue. But that can also be a bit daunting when you're starting out with a faction, and this series is meant to alleviate that problem. Like I said, the first faction we'll be looking into is the Sultanate, and the Sultanate is actually a faction where I think the best starting off point is the Suleiman battlefleet, the big box as we know it. Now, why do I think this big box is the best starting off point compared to most other factions? Most other factions often start with smaller battlefleets that you can start off with, where they come with smaller flagships that are ideal to start your first games with. The Suleiman battlefleet is a bit different compared to most of them. Most of these big boxes start with a very points expensive dreadnought level type of ship that is at a points cost that is not really ideal for your entry level games. However, this one is different. You start off with the Suleiman carrier, of course, and that carrier is very reasonably costed in this game at only 260 points. And you still get, as you do with all of the big boxes, lots and lots of different plastic options as well, because the Sultanate is known for being able to build unique catamaran ships where you glue two hulls together to create one large ship as well, and we'll be exploring this option a lot in this video. Another big advantage why I think this box is a great starting off point is because certain elements in your games like escorts and SRS are immediately covered, and an additional thing, the more esoteric and interesting options are pretty much already covered by this one big box set. Now, let's start at the beginning of this Suleiman fleet box. First of all, you get the Suleiman carrier. Again, this is an example that I got of the Sturginium Lounge, which was painted by Kedric Winks. He did a gorgeous rendition of this ship, so I thought to include it in this video. And like I said earlier, most of the times if you think big ships, you're thinking big points cost, and those are kind of hard to justify in smaller initial games, but at only 260 points, it's actually cheaper than most of the Mass 3 ships that other factions have to start with, so it's a great jumping up point for that as well. And in game, it acts as a fast option, and for a carrier, it is incredibly well armored. So many of the downsides of traditional carriers do not exist for this Suleiman. The only con to starting off with this ship as your main flagship is the fact that you're jumping straight into the SRS tokens, which are a bit more complex for beginners to start off with. But if you're not daunted by that one, this is pretty much what to get for this faction. And another con of this ship is that the themed fleet is a bit weirdly designed, I personally think. However, it's not the end of the world, because you can always just use the standard ship, and in fact, the standard fleet I should say, and in fact I would recommend that when you're starting out, because you don't tag additional rules onto already quite complex flagships. So for your first games, you're better off just using the standard, in this case of course the Sultanate fleets, because they'll get you a long way. With these big boxes, you're getting a ton of plastic, and there's always that question of what do I build first, and this part of the video is leaning into that one. Now, this is what I'll be doing for most of these getting started videos, so if you like that kind of content and you want to see more of it for many of the different factions in this game, make sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see it more. The first option I think you should include if you get this Suleiman as your starting off point is the Aydin support cruiser. Why is this such an interesting option to include? Well, first of all, it is a mandatory option if you do decide to use that Suleiman fleet, that themed fleet in the list. So you got that covered straight away, which is why I think it's a good build option. The second reason is this ship in-game comes with a supply depot rule, and that supply depot rule allows you to remove a disorder token from a ship when it activates. One strategy your opponent can have against a carrier is to slap it with so many different disorder tokens that it is in a state in which it can no longer launch its SRS tokens. You can't do this when this Aydin class support option is close to your flagship. And on top of that, the rules allow you to attach this ship as an escort to that Suleiman carrier. So one of the strategies your opponent can have to shut down your carrier is immediately shut down by including this ship as an option. So this is very much, for me at least, a no-brainer option to include if you buy this box. That's not to say that the other support ships are useless. The Morea and the Konya are solid options in any fleet. I mean, don't feel bad if you have built them, but the synergy with the Suleiman in particular is just not as good as this Aydin ship. After you've built that Aydin ship, you still have 2 hulls left over, or 2 plastic sprues left over to build other options with. Now, there's a wealth of options, but I think as a new player, one of the most fun options to start with is just go incredibly, jump into it and build the Nemrut supremacy cruiser option. It's, like you can see, one of those catamaran designs I mentioned at the start, where you get 2 hulls almost glued together by a bridge that includes 2 portals to go with it. And why do I think this is a useful option? Well, it's got a lot of rockets on it. It's got the 2 large rockets on each side of each hull and 2 small rocket batteries to go with it. And rockets are the ideal weapons against aerial units that we're going to see a lot more of as the game progresses. So if you're a beginner and you're investing in those, you're pretty much at a good point because you've got your anti-air option in there. And in addition, you will have a porter generator option as well, should you choose to expand with the core Caroli, which are already in the Orbat but not yet released. I think you're gonna have a good combo ship on your hands to start with it if you opt for this cruiser option. In addition, the standard Suleiman fleet comes with some ferric skiffs, which are small escort tokens to tag onto big ships, and this, or flagships I should say, but this ship can actually use them as well, so you can make the most out of your set by including this build option. With an Aydin and a Nemrut, you're essentially covered for your support plastic sprues, so what about the frontline squadron plastic sprues? Well, one of the options that I would build as one of the first starting with Sultanate, regardless of what buying path you choose, is the Mehmed Grand Monitor. Why? It gives you access to command and control. That is by far its biggest selling point. It gives you great flexibility in your fleet when this one is battle ready to really make the most out of your victory and valor cards. It is a complex system that is hard to get the most out of as a beginning player, but if you've built this option from the get-go, you will not regret it down the line. It can really shut down big activations from your opponent who relies on using cards to make fell swoops that can decimate your entire fleet. If you've got this one in your fleet, you can throw a spanner in the works. It's a great entry to get. Another thing it's got going for it for beginning players, it is by far the easiest entry in the whole Sultanate list to pilot. All of the guns are forwards facing, same with the torpedoes, the big gun batteries, and it comes with some extra generators, both magnetic and shield generator, to start you off with. Now, just one word of warning if you're a beginning player, do not go by this picture. In the rules it has a shield and a magnetic generator, but they have glued on a shield generator and a fury generator in the picture that they've used on their website. It's not a big deal because I advise against gluing down any of the generators as it is, but it is something I thought worth mentioning in this video as well. And you again get a great option to put extra ferric skiffs as an escort on, making the most out of those ships as well, because you're already hooking that Aydin onto your Suleiman carrier. And this ship has a rule called the Sultan's Monitor, allowing it to remove disorder tokens in the same manner that your Aydin did. And these do stack. So getting disrupted by your opponent if he tries to throw a lot of disorder tokens at you is something you just shut down in the list building stage if you are careful with your ship placement, making that combo great as well in game. After you've built the previous Grand Monitor, you're left with one option for your initial frontline support squadrons, and I would just go for the Iskandar cruiser. There are many options you can build, but I think this one's the best choice if you're starting out, especially when thinking about further expansion of your fleet onwards. Why the Iskandar? Well, it is what we call the mainstay ship, meaning it is the most standard ship that you can find in the fleet, but you can always expand upon them, and a full unit of those is never a bad idea anyway. The Iskandar as a cruiser is slightly more frail compared to other nations, but it does pack a lot of firepower because it is still under 100 points, which is a point cost that not many other nations, except maybe the Commonwealth, can still do these days. And you've got something in your list when you build this ship that is great against enemy submarines. So in the same way that the Nemrut was covering the anti-air thing, you're covering the anti-submarine play with this Iskandar class cruiser, and that gives you just great flexibility in your initial list. Also, another thing to remember is, should you expand into an Anatolia battle fleet later on, this just makes sure that you can get a full unit of those Iskandars, which just unlocks a whole bunch of gameplay reasons to do so as well. That pretty much covers your initial box. So the next question is, what's next to get if you're an initial player? Well, like I've hinted at with the Iskandar, the Anatolia battle fleet is then a great option. Why? Because it gives you access to a very cheap second flagship option to just allow you to get more ships in as you go along. And if you've got that full squadron of Iskandar, you mustn't forget the Anatolia comes with 2 more frontline squadron sprues, and those can be built as Iskandars to complete that unit. You get that one covered by the Suleiman box. A full Iskandar unit also gives the Suleiman fleet bonus, so even if you're not expanding into the Anatolia just yet with this box, you are getting the plastic sprues to make the most out of the themed battle fleet of the Suleiman as well, making it a very smart second option to get. If you don't quite want to jump into this box, you can get a cheaper alternative, money-wise, in getting another set of the Sultanate frontline squadrons, which you can then expand as Iskandar to just make your Suleiman fleet complete. But don't skimp out on the option of just getting a Harem class Grand Monitor. That actually is the more expensive flagship compared to the Suleiman, but you just need a single box of those and you've got yet another flagship to use your escorts on, etc. in that Harem. So that's also an option. And of course there's always the option, just why not both? And now, the final part of the video. Why have I been recommending these things? Well, I've got here an example 1500 points fleet list. Now, why a 1500 points fleet list? 1500 points is essentially the base army size that this game is designed around. For those of you familiar with Warhammer 40k games or Age of Sigmar games, 1500 points in Dystopian Wars is the equivalent to 2000 points in Age of Sigmar or Warhammer 40k. So that's pretty much what you what you want to aim at. And the great thing about it is, if you bought the Suleiman fleet and the Anatolia fleet, you've got this covered. You've got your standard game. Why? Let's take a look at it. The Suleiman battle fleet, of course, gives you the Suleiman, which comes in at a very cheap 265 points right now, and the Aydin that I recommended, which is attached to it. The Nemrut supremacy cruiser is just 245 points, and you've got your Mehmed Grand Monitor for 240, which you can then give 2 ferric skiffs, which I added at the very last stage, let's be honest, just to fill out the points that you have. If you combine that with your Anatolia battle fleet, you can get the heavy battle cruiser in there at just 225 points, and your 3 Iskandar cruisers at 285. Now the bonus when you add a full Iskandar cruiser fleet means that your ferric skiffs are free for the Anatolia, which is sort of kept in the back of my head when making this fleet. And of course you can fill it out with those 6 Temir frigates that I didn't discuss in this video, but which are an absolute no-brainer because they are some of the best +1 ships in the game right now. I mean, I refer to my Sultanate deep dive video for this, but these things are so good and they come included with the Suleiman fleet that they're too good not to use in this fleet. So this is what I would make out of those 2 battle fleets. If you agree with me, make sure that you leave a comment and say why. If you disagree, same thing really, I'd like to hear from you. And if it helped you, remember, give it a thumbs up so that it gets picked up by the YouTube algorithms. And I hope to see you in the next installment of these Getting Started videos. Bye!